The Palace on the Floor, Part 2. "Bring the prisoner here," said the voice. Dimples looked through a hole in the floor, which was not difficult, as the floor was full of holes, and there, on the bottom brick of all, stood the toy captain. "Come along, bottom brick, captain waiting," said her guide, and with some little difficulty, for it's not easy to jump from one beam to another when one is accustomed to solid floors, she scrambled after him and arrived in front of the terrible captain. "Oho!" said the captain, grasping his sword as tightly as he could, which was very tight, as it happened, because his fingers were glued to it. "Who is the real person now, you or I?" The question was a puzzling one, but Dimples did her best to answer it truthfully. "Well," she said, "I suppose you are real, though I didn't think so before, and I suppose I am real too, but it is rather confusing, isn't it?" "Not at all confusing," said the captain, a little rudely, it must be owned. "It's quite clear that I am real, of course, but as for you, why, you're not even painted." "No," said Dimples, as politely as she could, "I'm not painted, and I don't think I want to be painted, thank you. Why, I should never feel safe for a moment if I had a face that anybody could wash off with a sponge." At this the toy captain was so furious that he shook with anger from head to foot. "Do you know," he said, "that I only have to pull out the brick on which I'm standing, and the whole palace will tumble down on your head?" "Of course I know," laughed Dimples, who was growing less frightened every minute. "But if you do, it will tumble down on your head as well as mine." "That is true," said the toy captain, "but I am a real person, and I am made of wood, so it will make no difference to me." Dimples was obliged to own that there was something in what the captain said, and as she disliked nothing so much as being beaten in an argument, she at once pretended not to be listening. "Oh dear, how hungry I am," she said, yawning. "If you were real and not made up," said the toy captain, "you would never get hungry at all." However, he called out to a soldier who was mounting guard on the top of a pillar just over his head, and ordered him to bring the prisoner some food. In a few minutes Dimple found herself in front of a curious meal, served on a round cardboard dish, and consisting of one red jelly, 2 raw mutton chops, a bunch of grapes, and a slice of salmon. "But they won't come off the dishes, will they?" asked Dimples, who had fed her dolls for years on the very things that were now being placed in front of her. "Of course not," said the toy captain. "They would have been lost long ago if they had not been stuck on. What more can you want? If you were a real person, as you pretend to be, your appetite would be taken away by the mere sight of dishes like those." This, in fact, was what had already happened to Dimples, for there was nothing very enticing about a jelly from which she remembered sucking the paint off only a week ago, while as for the other things, even her youngest and favourite doll was beginning to grow tired of their monotony, so she made no objection when the captain ordered the dishes to be removed. "Now you have satisfied your hunger," continued the captain. "I will order you to be taken upstairs to the dungeon." "Upstairs?" exclaimed Dimples. "What a funny place for a dungeon!" "Funny? Not in the least," said the captain severely. In a palace of this kind, you must take the rooms as you find them. You will find the dungeon squeezed between the drawing room and the kitchen, at the very top of the left-hand tower. There you will have to stop until the king comes." "Who is the king?" asked Dimples, curiously. Before the toy captain had time to answer, the band of regiments struck up an inspiriting march. To be sure, there were only 2 wooden drummer boys and 2 wooden trumpeters, of whom one had lost his trumpet, and was therefore obliged to blow continually through his stiffened fingers. But for all that, they made quite a cheerful noise, and in the middle of the king mounted the steps and entered the palace. "Hooray! The king! It's the king!" shouted the whole regiment in 20 wooden voices. "The king?" repeated Dimples. "Why, it's the prince." "Don't talk nonsense," said the captain gruffly. "Do you suppose we would allow ourselves to be commanded by a mere prince? This is a real king, I can tell you, though he isn't made of wood, more's the pity." And when Dimples saw the dignified way in which the little king walked into the palace, she could not help agreeing that he was a very real king indeed. She found it difficult to believe that he was nothing but her playfellow, Prince Picotee, for never before had she seen him look so happy and so triumphant. There was no doubt that the little king had found his kingdom, and Dimples, remembering that she was really his prisoner, began to wish that she had not teased him so much about his toy palace and his toy soldiers. But the king did not even see her. He walked straight into the great hall and stood still and drew a long breath of satisfaction. "It is the most wonderful palace that ever was built," he murmured to himself. "It's much, much more wonderful than I thought." Then his eyes fell upon Dimples, who was trying to hide behind the stiff figure of the toy captain on the bottom brick. "Who is that girl in my palace? What is she doing here?" asked the king, frowning. "Please, your majesty, it is your majesty's prisoner," answered the captain. "She is waiting for your majesty to decide on her punishment." "What has the prisoner done?" asked the king, in as dignified manner as he could assume, considering that he stood on a tottering brick at the edge of the abyss in which the captain and his prisoner awaited him. "Please, your majesty, she was heard to say that your majesty's army was not a real army, and that I, your majesty, I was nothing but a toy soldier," said the captain. And he again shook with anger from head to foot, which, after all, was the only way he could shake, because he was made all in one piece. "Send the prisoner here," commanded the king. "It is not safe to keep a prisoner on the bottom brick, especially when she is a girl." So Dimples, wishing from the bottom of her heart that her little playfellow that she had teased had not suddenly been changed into a king, clambered up again into the hall.
And now it is time for all little children to go to sleep. Good night.